I actually think it's time for us to think about what we count, because what we actually count truly counts. Let me start by telling you a little story. This is Van Quash. She came to this country in 1986 from Vietnam. She changed her name to Vivian because she wanted to fit in here in America. Her first job was in an inner city motel in San Francisco as a maid. I actually happened to buy that motel about 3 months after Vivian started working there. So Vivian and I have actually been working together for 23 years. With the youthful idealism of a 26-year-old, in 1987, I started my company and I called it Joie de Vivre, a very impractical name, and because I actually was looking to create joy of life. And as I spent time with Vivian, I saw that she had sort of a joie de vivre in how she did her work. It made me question and be curious, how could someone actually find joy in actually cleaning toilets for a living? So I spent time with Vivian, and I saw that she didn't find joy in cleaning toilets. Her job, her goal, and her calling was not to become the world's greatest toilet scrubber. What counts for Vivian was the emotional connection she created with her fellow employees and our guests. And what gave her inspiration and meaning was the fact that actually she was taking care of people who were far away from home because Vivian knew what it was like to be far away from home. That very human lesson, more than 20 years ago, served me well during the last economic downturn we had. Well, my name of my company, Joie de Vivre. So I started getting these letters from places like Alabama and Orange County saying to me that they were going to boycott my company because they thought we were a French company. And one particular day, when I was feeling a little depressed and not a lot of joie de vivre, I ended up in the local bookstore around the corner from our offices. And that's where I got reacquainted with Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I took one psychology class in college, and I learned about this guy, Abraham Maslow, as many of us are familiar with his hierarchy of needs. But as I sat there for 4 hours, the full afternoon, reading Maslow, I actually recognized something that is true of most leaders. And one of the simplest facts in business is something that we often neglect, and that is that we're all human. And each of us, no matter what our role is in business, actually has some hierarchy of needs in the workplace. So as I started reading more Maslow, what I actually started to realize is that actually Maslow, later in his life, wanted to take this hierarchy for the individual and apply it to the collective, to organizations, and specifically to business. But unfortunately, he died prematurely in 1970. And so I realized in that dot-com crash that my role in life was to channel Abe Maslow. And that's what I did a few years ago when I actually took that 5-level hierarchy of needs pyramid and turned it into what I call the transformation pyramid, which is survival, success, and transformation. It's not just fundamental in business, it's fundamental in life. Now, as I went out and started spending time with other leaders out there and asking them how they were getting through that time, what they told me over and over again was that they just manage what they can measure. And what we can measure is that tangible stuff at the bottom of the pyramid. They didn't actually even see the intangible stuff higher up the pyramid. So I started asking myself the question, how can we get leaders to start valuing the intangible? If we're taught as leaders to just manage what we can measure, and all we can measure is the tangible in life, we're missing a whole lot of things at the top of the pyramid. The teenage king of Bhutan was also a curious man. At age 17, he started asking the kind of questions that you'd expect of someone with a beginner's mind. A trip through India, early in his reign as king, he actually was asked by an Indian journalist about the Bhutanese GDP, the size of the Bhutanese GDP. He said the following. He said, "Why are we so obsessed and focused with gross domestic product? Why don't we care more about gross national happiness?" Now, in essence, the king was asking us to consider an alternative definition of success, what has come to be known as GNH, or gross national happiness. Most world leaders didn't take notice, and those that did thought this was just Buddhist economics. But the king was serious, and this was a notable moment, because this is the first time a world leader in almost 200 years had suggested that that intangible of happiness. Again, that leader 200 years ago, Thomas Jefferson with the Declaration of Independence, 200 years later, this king was suggesting that intangible of happiness is something we should measure, and it's something that we should actually value as government officials. In fact, as leaders, what we need to learn is that we can actually influence the quality of that unit of production by actually creating the conditions for our employees to live their calling. And in fact, in Vivian's case, her unit of production isn't the tangible hours she works, It's the intangible difference she makes during that 1 hour of work. Why is it that business leaders and investors quite often don't see the connection between creating the intangible of employee happiness with creating the tangible of financial profits in their business? We don't have to choose between inspired employees and sizable profits. We can have both. Business leaders and political leaders who know what to count. We count numbers. We count on people. What really counts is when we actually use our numbers to truly take into account our people. I learned that from a maid in a motel and a king of a country. What can you start counting today? What one thing can you start counting today that actually would be meaningful in your life, whether it's your work life or your business life?